The Extraordinary Control and Public Affairs Chamber took up the Mariusz Kaminski case after the Supreme Court decided that the Labor and Social Security Chamber was not competent to make a final decision. The decisive fact in the judge's decision was the right of clemency applied by the president in the case. Yesterday, the Supreme Court's Extraordinary Control and Public Affairs Chamber made a similar decision in the case of MP Maciej Wąsik. The Supreme Court stated that the issuance of an order declaring the expiration of the MP's mandate was not possible due to the validity of the order of the President of Poland dated November 16, 2015, on the application of the law of clemency, pursuant to which there was a pardon and letting go and discontinuance of proceedings. Supreme Court Judge President of the Labor and Social Security Chamber Piotr Prusinowski disagrees with the Chamber's decisions. It was to him that Marshal of the same Szymon Hołownia directed the appeals. However, the documents were not registered by the submission office. In addition, they were addressed to another chamber of the Supreme Court. I am doing this out of concern for them, so that this case stays, so that this case is heard by a court that does not raise any doubts. In addition, the Marshal of the same wrote a letter to Labor Chamber Chairman Piotr Prusinowski to appoint, in his opinion, appropriate judges. I request that the case be entrusted to a panel of judges that will not undermine the trust that the judiciary should inspire in a democratic society and the rule of law. Members of the Law and Justice Parliamentary Club have filed a notice to the prosecutor's office about the possibility of a crime committed by the Marshal of the same and the director of his chancellery. In their view, Szymon Hołownia exceeded his authority by attempting to influence the determination of the composition of the Supreme Court. The second person in the state wanted to determine the composition of the judiciary. This is unacceptable. First President of the Supreme Court, Małgorzata Manowska, issued a statement on the actions of the Marshal of the same. In accordance with procedural regulations, the decision on the outcome of the appeals by the Supreme Court will be officially forwarded to the Marshal of the same. It is impermissible for the Marshal of the same to direct a request for an explanation from any Supreme Court president. It is worth noting that identical documents were submitted by MPs Maciej Wąsik and Mariusz Kaminski. The former Interior Minister does not rule out that the Supreme Court's decisions may be ignored. I lived through the 1980s in Poland. Then I started my activity as a young boy, a student. I was one of the activists of the underground Independent Student Association. I was detained many times by the security service. I am not afraid of anything. The provisions of the law, in terms of jurisdiction to hear the appeals of the MPs in question, Wąsik and Kaminski, should go to the Extraordinary Control Chamber, because that is what the Supreme Court law indicates. Polish President Andrzej Duda applied the right of clemency to Maciej Wąsik and Mariusz Kaminski in connection with the so-called land scandal in a decision dated November 16, 2015. Last December, a second-instance district court issued a guilty verdict. The Marshal of the same terminated their mandates. As a result, the deputies appealed the decision to the Supreme Court. Heavy rains have caused flooding in England and Wales. More than 1,000 buildings have been flooded, including hundreds last night alone. Many residents have been evacuated, and there are serious difficulties in rail transportation. Nottinghamshire County declared a major incident on Thursday due to the rising water levels along the River Trent following Storm Hank, which passed through on Tuesday, January 3rd. Some residential areas had to be evacuated, the Environment Agency said. Caroline Douglas, the Environment Agency's flood director, was quoted by the British newspaper The Guardian as saying the River Trent was at some of the highest levels we've seen in 24 years. The Environment Agency said flooding was possible across parts of the Midlands and south and east of England on Friday, and ongoing flooding from rivers is also probable along parts of the River Severn and River Trent for the next 5 days. Gloucestershire locals swapped cars for boats on Friday as flooding forced them to paddle through the streets of the southwestern English county. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said he recognized how devastating the impact of flooding was and advised people living in areas with government-issued flood warnings to follow advice from the Environment Agency and local authorities.
Well, actually, I spoke to people in the East Midlands yesterday who had been affected and talking to them about how devastating the impact of flooding is. I just want people to be reassured that the Environment Agency has got people on the ground in all the affected areas. Also, more hundreds of high-volume pumps are in practice right now, making a difference.
A succession of storms in recent weeks meant prolonged rainfall that fell on saturated ground and quickly caused already swollen rivers and waterways to burst their banks. Paralympian Oscar Pistorius is out of prison. Pistorius, known as the Android Hunter because of his carbon fiber prosthetic legs, shot his 29-year-old partner, model Riva Steenkamp, on Valentine's Day 2013. Before the court, he repeatedly said he did it unintentionally because he thought she was a thief. In 2014, he was initially sentenced to 5 years in prison for premeditated murder. But in late 2015, the top appeals court found him guilty of murder after an appeal by prosecutors. In 2016, he was re-imprisoned for 6 years, less than half of the 15-year minimum sentence sought by prosecutors. In 2017, the Supreme Court more than doubled the sentence to 13 years and 5 months, finding the 6-year prison term shockingly lenient. Early last year, Pistorius was denied parole, but the Constitutional Court ruled that Pistorius had served most of his sentence and could be released. At least 26 people were injured in a collision between subway trains on the Upper West Side of New York City.
This afternoon around 3 o'clock, EMS received multiple 911 calls reporting a train derailment. Upon our unit's arrival here on the scene, they were met with several patients. Fortunately, nobody was seriously injured. The injuries that were sustained were consistent with a low-speed train derailment, and all of those patients have been removed to area hospitals.
About 300 passengers were evacuated. The accident occurred when unknown perpetrators applied the emergency brakes on one of the subway trains.
I was standing up holding on the train, but I was in a lot of shock. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I saw smoke, and I just got really nervous. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know if it was an attack. I didn't know what. I saw smoke, and I just didn't know what was going to happen next. All I was hoping was I would get out of the train car safely.
We were on the train, and then there was a sudden jerk forward, a jerk back. Everyone started falling on top of each other, and then there was just basically silent. We were in the front car, so we had a general sense of what was going on since we could overhear the walkie-talkies from the MTA personnel in the front, but there wasn't an official announcement. But we had to walk through cars. There were a lot of people trying to jam doors open for us to walk through, and we walked through one train and then transferred to the other.
Fire department officials said that a passenger train departing the 96th Street station around 3 p.m. local time struck a work train, causing the work train carrying transit workers to derail. Emergency personnel responded to the scene, shut off the power line, and escorted passengers back to the 96th Street station. WABC also reported the conductor of the train received treatment for minor injuries. The accident significantly disrupted subway services throughout the city.